Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the second part of our five-part webinar series. It's called the Best Building Blocks for Cognitive Success webinar series. And today we're going to be talking about the 4 stages of learning. So welcome. Christy is joining us. Hey, Christy.
Hi, guys.
We wanted to do just a little bit of house cleaning before we get started. We are going to be showing you this chat and questions slide. Whenever we get to the chat and questions slide, that's when we're going to take a look at the um, chat area and answer any comments or respond to comments. What we're doing is this is obviously being recorded. You guys will get a copy of it at the end of the webinar. And we're going to take a bunch of the different sections and break them up and be able to use them in other areas. So we will look forward to chatting with you and answering any questions that you might have whenever you see this particular screen. Another thing I wanted to mention is we do have the handouts. I sent the handouts out late last night to everyone that was pre-registered for the webinar. So please check your email. You should have received the handout. If not, we do have a handouts tab within Webinar Ninja. It looks like a little piece of paper with a dog ear or an edge folded down. If you go to that area, you should be able to download the handouts. We do recommend that you actually download the handouts in advance whenever possible. There's actually some research out there that shows that if you write your notes actually on the handouts, it's actually more effective for memory and it's easier to find your notes and they're related to what is on the sheet, etc. So I think that that would be a good idea. I know I was talking to someone the other day and she showed me all of her notes from all of our webinars. She printed everything out and had them all in a binder. So that was kind of cool. So welcome, everybody. Is there any questions before we start? See, we've got Jane from Ottawa, Betsy from Albuquerque, Ilona. Welcome, Ilona. Lisa's from the UK, I think. Great. Christy is no longer a presenter. What did she do? Okay, give me just a second here, peoples, and we will try and get Christy back in, and then we will get started. So let me just see if I can figure out what the heck happened there. We got to have Christy for our presentations. Okay, we'll give her just a second. Any questions? How many of you are new to our group? There was a lot of people. Christy, we lost you as a presenter there for a minute, so don't do that again. So anyways, welcome again. We've got Christy back. So the question was, how many people are new to our group? We have about 80 people registered for the webinar, and most of those are people that we're not familiar with. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. All right.
Michelle,
Yeah,
I have a quick question. Can you
yeah.
hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep,
Good.
we've got you. Okay. We're going to go ahead and move forward then. Each week, we will do what we call an iterative review in order to sort of spark your memories of what's been talked about before, because all of these topics are really going to integrate and to work together. So each week, we'll do an iterative review. We'll talk just briefly about the topics that were previously discussed in prior webinars, and then we'll move into the actual content. So last week, we talked about an introduction to cognitive rehabilitation. And this gives us the definition of Cog Rehab, some of the goals of Cog Rehab, as well as why cognitive rehabilitation is important. So the definition of Cog Rehab is the process of addressing cognitive challenges in order to help people with a whole bunch of different neurological conditions improve their daily life skills in a systematic and practical way. And in the webinar last time, we emphasized the practical aspect of this. And we hope that through our webinars, we are helping you understand with some practical strategies and techniques. And hopefully that will help you as you are dealing with and hopefully recovering as best you can from whatever condition. When we say a variety of neurological conditions, that can be a brain injury, it can be multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, it can be long COVID. There's a variety of conditions that Cog Rehab can actually help with. The goals of Cog Rehab are to improve practical life skills, to increase one's independence, and also hopefully to improve sort of the overall quality of life. And then why is Cog Rehab important? Because it helps you hopefully increase your self awareness. Self awareness is going to be a big part of what we're going to talk about today in terms of our 4 stages of learning. Awareness is actually one of those stages. It also will, it's important because it will help you identify your strengths and weaknesses. You may not know what some of your strengths and weaknesses are after, whatever has happened to you. That's part of what we're going to talk about today also. And then the final reason why it's important that we have listed here is that it can really help you search and find effective strategies for different challenges that you might be having. We also, in the last webinar, talked about the difference between restorative and compensatory techniques and sort of the methods or the models of Cog Rehab. And we also went through a list of a variety of rehab professionals. It certainly wasn't a comprehensive list. In fact, I know Betsy mentioned that yoga therapy is becoming a pretty popular thing after brain injury. And so that will be one that we'd have to add at some point in time. So that's just a quick review of what we talked about in the last webinar. How many of you were with us in the last webinar? Give us a quick shout out if you joined us in the last webinar and recall some of this information. Alona's with us. Good. Excuse me. Natalia, great. Well, good. Hopefully that was a nice review to sort of help you recall that information. And as I mentioned, each one of these webinars are sort of going to build on each other. So when we talked about identifying strengths and challenges, increasing self-awareness, you're going to see how all that fits in this week. Any thoughts before we move on, Christy?
Not at this point.
Okay. All right. Leanne watched the replay. Very good. Thanks. Okay, let's go ahead and actually get started with the webinar. So there are 4 stages of learning. This slide gives us just sort of an overview of those. The first stage is ignorance. Then we move on to awareness, then learning, and finally mastery. If you look at these, we're going to talk about each one of these independently and how, as you go through the stages of learning and you get to that mastery, things seem to be a lot easier. Things are more natural, more automatic for you. And for many people, after an injury or something that might happen to them, you may have already gotten to that mastery level prior to whatever happened to you. And after the injury, you are now sort of striving to get back to some of that level of learning and also mastery. So let's start with what they call the unconscious incompetence stage. I don't expect you, or we don't expect you to remember those names. It's just sort of the formal name for this. So unconscious, meaning you're not aware, and incompetence, meaning that you aren't able to do something. So ignorance is really you being unaware or not knowing what you don't know. So it's you're unaware of a skill and lack actual proficiency in that particular skill. You don't know what you don't know. You don't realize that you can't do some things you used to be able to do. And finally, you don't recognize that you need to do things differently after your injury. So the ignorance stage, don't think of it as a bad thing. Think of it as sort of where you start. After an injury, you may not know where your struggles or your challenges are. You may just be going through the day assuming that everything is working the way that it used to. Unfortunately, that often is not the case. And it is a process, and 4 stages of learning. It's a process of learning that you need to go through in order to sort of get past that. So if you don't know what you don't know, think about this for a few moments about your own situation. Are there things that people have told you that you're struggling with that you may not have recognized right off the bat? Certainly, when we get to the next stage, you're aware of the fact that you're struggling with some of these things. But in the ignorant stage, you are really not aware that you're struggling. Okay.
I I just
Yeah.
wanted to add something. I was thinking of this last night that ignorance is kind of like when you start something new or different, such
Mm.
as a class, doing a new sport or job, living in a new place, meeting somebody that's new. You don't know anything about them, so you're ignorant as to, are they going to like to do this, or doing something this way might offend them, or say something it might offend them. So it's kind of that idea also, to try to give you some examples.
Yeah, great. We have a few examples here to share with you. So, here's some scenarios that maybe you can relate to. You don't realize that your time management is impacted after your injury. So, that would be you don't really know that you're late or that time management is a factor in some of the potential challenges that you might be experiencing. You don't realize that you can't or shouldn't drive due to maybe some attentional issues that you have that you're not aware of, or your processing speed is slower, or your decision making has been impacted. Um, all of these things can impact your ability to drive, but if you don't recognize or acknowledge that those cognitive issues are there for you, then you may get in a car and drive and have challenges, but just not be aware of it. You're not aware that finances are no longer easy for you. Oftentimes, what happens is people keep trying to do their checkbook or pay different kinds of bills, and it's not easy anymore. It's difficult. You may be missing kinds of missing deadlines or due dates, but you're not really aware of that. So, again, that is this ignorant stage. You don't recognize how poor organization causes disruptions in your daily routine. So each of these are potential areas where you might not know what you don't know immediately after your injury.
I
So
wanted
here's just a quick summary. You're unaware of a skill and lack proficiency. You don't know what you don't know. Go for it, Christy.
I just wanted to add that it could be that you're doing that specific idea, such as the um paying the bills, but there might be a step that you're not aware of that you're
Mhm.
missing. And so, for instance, if you're writing out the check and you forget to put how much you're writing out a check to pay for the bill, and you don't put any notes anywhere, whether it's the ledger, or make some kind of note about how much the amount is somewhere, you just went and paid, and then you go to your bank later on, or you go to pay for something, and the funds are not there. So it might be that you're missing a step, and you're able to do something, but you're missing a step, an important step, and not aware of it.
Good point. Okay, so let's now go to our chat and question. Jan says, so the stages apply to different skills. Absolutely. One of the things, if you hang around with us long enough, you'll know that I try to apply this stuff to almost everything. So, absolutely. I think the stages of learning, it's not just about learning a book or reading a book or school related, it's about everyday kind of learning. Um, and let's just say that you go to an ATM machine, and different ATM machines are different. And if you don't pay attention to the ATM machine that you're at right now, you may hit the wrong button accidentally, not know it, and something there could be a consequence to that. There's all sorts of different ways in which the stages of learning can apply to your everyday life.
I liked
Um,
Annie's comment here. Many skills were previously a habit,
mhm, yeah.
and now you
And
have to learn them.
yeah, when you have that habit, that goes into that mastery level that we're gonna get to, so I'm glad you mentioned that, Annie. That's a great, great comment. The next stage of learning is awareness. And that's what they call the conscious incompetence. So you know that you don't know, basically, at this point in the awareness stage. You're aware of the skill, but not yet proficient at it. So you recognize that you can't do something you used to be able to do before your injury, but you haven't really started to relearn it yet. You realize that you may need to approach things differently after your injury. Um, Once you get past that ignorant stage and you sort of recognize, you know what, something isn't working here. It, I'm struggling. That's the awareness stage. Now, that doesn't mean that just because you're aware, everything is perfect or fine. In fact, when you're aware, it can be more disruptive and more upsetting for you because now all of a sudden you recognize that you are struggling with something. And part of what we want to do at best is to provide you with those strategies that may help you as you become aware of some of your struggles or your challenges. So a few scenarios, the same scenarios now applied to awareness. So now looking at time management, you realize that your time management isn't what it was before your injury and you want to improve it. That's the awareness stage. Remember, ignorance is you didn't know that you were having problems with time management. In the second scenario that we provided, you realize that your processing speed may be slow and that it can impact your ability to drive. Okay, now you're aware of that processing speed. Now you can begin to do something about it. You can begin to work on some exercises that might help with processing speed or attention or whatever the challenge is that you recognize. You forget to pay the bill and realize that tracking finances is more difficult for you after your brain injury. You may um, have discussions with family members that you can still do the finances. That's sort of the ignorant stage if you're really challenged in that area. Awareness is when you begin to realize, you know, my bill, I didn't get it paid on time. I need to change something. I recognize that I'm struggling. And then the last one is you're aware that you're not very organized and can't find things and spend a lot of time searching for things. I think we can all relate to that.
Yeah,
So,
go ahead.
no, go ahead, Christy.
I was just gonna say um I I found out that I struggle with, I wouldn't just say finances, it's anything to do with numbers. When I it's dates, it's phone numbers, it's the calendar, it's any kind of math concepts, and that I definitely need to look and do things differently.
Yeah, that and see, that's that awareness, right? You recognize that you're struggling with it or that you're challenged by it. And once you hit that awareness stage, you think you can then go into the next stage, which is learning. And that's where you start learning the strategies and putting them to work. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. So just to, again, quick review. Ignorance is you are unaware of a skill and lack proficiency. You don't know what you don't know. Awareness is you're aware of the skill but you're not yet proficient at it. So that is an important thing. You will hear probably the concept of awareness or building insights. Insights are sort of that idea of becoming aware of challenges that you have. Insights are sort of a deeper kind of thing, but this becomes very important in you being more successful in your everyday life. So we're now at our chat and question area. Any thoughts so far? Annie says, I really didn't know what I didn't know. So I think that that's such a common thing. And, one of the things, Christy and I are both educators. So we come at cognitive rehabilitation and at brain injury from a perspective of educators, not a medical model per se. And so that's one of the reasons why we are always looking for ways to apply and to generalize sort of more everyday practical concepts to an individual living with a brain injury. Let's see. Leanne says, I was offended by the word incompetence, but now I embrace it. Oh, look at that. Very good. I've been able to fine tune and discover what I need to focus on to help me bring myself up beyond. Absolutely. I think that, the word ignorance, the word incompetent really sort of conjures up some negative connotations for people. And what we want to do is we want to help you understand that it's a stage of learning, and it doesn't matter whether you have a brain injury or whether you don't have a brain injury. We all are often at that stage when we first start something. We are all often at that stage of ignorance in the terms that we're using here. But really, the idea is we don't know what we don't know about something. I started doing woodworking a number of years ago, and I just thought, oh, I'm just going to go in and I'm going to start using a table saw and I'm going to start doing all these things. I was ignorant to what it took to do woodworking. And so as soon as I became aware that, I was making mistakes that I should be not making, etc., then I was able to begin to come up with those strategies. So just an example.
Well,
It's
I
Go
wanted
ahead.
to add something to our time management example is that the awareness of something of not planning enough time,
Mm.
thinking and that you can do X within a certain amount of time, and it takes a lot longer, and we're not aware that it takes a lot longer, and then we also unaware that we need to plan for, because it does take so long, that we need to plan. Not only does it take longer, but and the awareness of it, but we also need to add the plans to it. um, I liked what Leanne said. My processing speed has been a problem for many years. I know it takes me so much longer than the average person to reach mastery. And that's a really good point. The only person that notices that is herself. The I am now slowly learning not to beat myself up, instead pull my sleeves up and keep at the process that I'm until I'm done. That's an awesome comment.
That is a great comment. Thank you, Leanne, for sharing that. Yeah, that's great. Um, We've also got it was helpful description about how to describe the word ignorant as a learning stage. Yeah, and I really don't like that word. I mean, again, I think it really conjures up some negative thoughts. But if we look at it more as a you don't know what you don't know, that is something that I think is easier to digest. But we still, in terms of the stages and us presenting, we wanted to do it in the form that that they're usually presented. Okay, let's move on then. Unconscious competence. So this is where we may not really be aware of how competent we are in certain areas. And that really is the learning stage. So we started with ignorance. We don't know what we don't know. We then went to awareness. We recognize that we don't know something. And now we're going to do something about it, which is what I think Leanne was just talking about. Now we're going to learn. You're going to be able to learn the skill, but it requires a heck of a lot of focus, a lot of time, and a whole lot of practice. So you initiate the steps necessary to begin the learning process. And then once you've initiated it, you've got to practice, 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 practice. I could say that 10,000 times. And that's what you have to do. So the learning stage is really all about taking that awareness and then beginning to do something about it, beginning the process of learning, which is not always easy. It's certainly not always fast. And but it's that stage that you're probably going to spend the most time in. So let's take a look at our scenarios and how they apply, or how the learning phase applies to our scenarios. You focus on your time management by starting to notice how long it takes you to do things. And then you begin planning adequate time for preparation and completing your tasks. So that's, again, the learning process. That does not happen overnight. That takes time. You enroll in a driver evaluation and follow a prescribed plan based on the evaluation feedback or report. You go for a driver eval, you get the feedback, you now know what you need to be working on, and it's going to take time to do that. You schedule your bills at least a week in advance. You create a task reminder to review and pay the bills weekly, and you pay monthly via online banking, maybe. So, all of these things are things that you're learning and that you're going to put into practice and that you're going to do over time. The last one is you establish and implement strategies. Everything has a home. color coding, etc., to help overcome organizational challenges. Now, I mentioned that what we talked about last week was going to apply this week, and what we talk about this week is going to apply in the future. One of the things that becomes very important about this is a lot of this has to do with what we call self-regulation. And we have a future webinar on self-regulation within this particular series. But a lot of learning has to do with self-regulation. You have to plan, what am I going to do? You have to monitor, how am I doing? Is this really working for me? And then you have to evaluate and say it worked or it didn't, and here's what I'm going to change. So we'll talk about self-regulation in detail in a future webinar, but I just wanted to kind of show you how all these things kind of relate to each other.
I wanted to add one of the things that another example would be for passwords. You don't
Yes.
you don't you can't remember. You're not aware that, oh, you know what, I'm not remembering these, and that you have to go back, look at your passwords, find the passwords. But and then that part about practice, 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 that those passwords that you use constantly, you're learning them, and eventually, when it comes time for our next step, eventually, not all, because Michelle will say, don't use the same password for everything. So there are going to be things, there are going to be areas and places for different things that you don't have the same password, but eventually there are going to be those passwords, such as, your phone. You might know the password to your phone or what have you, but it's because you practice, practice, practice that now that is one area that I was thinking of, that you could feel that, you know what, I mastered it in this one area.
Mhm.
Or a meal, preparing a meal. You might have struggled not knowing how to make a meal, but when you practice, 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 you know what, you finally have that one thing down. So I just wanted to
Those are two great examples, Christy. I'm going to say something about the meal and then go back to passwords because you know how I feel about passwords. The meal example is a really great one because one of the things that happens is people want to, when you're just starting to get back to cooking, let's say, after whatever's happened to you, you want to go and make, whatever the meals were that you could make before. And that is, that's sort of a lack of awareness that there's a ton of different steps. It might be ignorance to a certain extent. You don't know that you really can't handle that many steps anymore in cooking. Then you become aware, oh, you know what? That's really hard for me. The learning process is maybe you start with a salad and you make the salad and other people in your family maybe make something else, an entree, or you start with a pre-packaged salad and you just add a few ingredients to it. This is all still part of that learning process, but I'm trying to illustrate to you that the learning process takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of practice, and you don't want to, start at the being a master at something. You want to go through that process so that you can really learn it and be comfortable with it and get to the point where you do master it and you can hold on to that information and be successful. In terms of the passwords, that's a really important one too. So a lot of people may not know what they don't know about passwords. For instance, maybe you put your passwords in your wallet on a sheet of paper, or you have it in a notebook or some kind of paper thing that you have with you that you carry with you. Or you put all your passwords on sticky notes on your computer or on your desk or something. So you may not know that that's not really a very safe way of storing your passwords. And if you use the same password for everything, you may not know that that's definitely not a safe practice for you to have. Awareness is, me telling you that's not safe, or hearing that on the news, or hearing from someone that someone got their password and hacked an account or something. Learning is then, what do I do about that? How can I learn to organize my passwords in a more efficient way, or make sure that I don't use some of those practices that are more unsafe when it comes to passwords. And that's going to be trying things out. You're going to have to try different approaches or different strategies. Some are going to work, some aren't going to work. I happen to use a password management app that I've been using for years. And I don't have a password on my computer or on my phone or anything that's less than 25 characters. And people laugh at me and truly make fun of me. Christy is included in that lot, because I have such long passwords. But it's because I know what can happen, and I have a strategy in order to prevent it as best I can. So I hope that that's helpful for you. Any questions? We're going to take a look at the chat. Christy, has anything been going on in the chat that you think would be helpful?
No, just recently we had a little bit of people, myself included, talking about passwords. Annie's got something here. I didn't understand. I had to learn everyday tasks just from scratch, and
Mhm.
that's that's a biggie.
Yeah, that is a biggie. Jan says, I used to have a logical strategy for creating passwords, I'm assuming for different apps, so I could remember them. It stopped working for me. This is a really good example of how sometimes after an injury, or if a condition comes about, certain techniques or strategies or the way that you did things before may not work for you. And that recognition, Jan, is awareness, right? That's that awareness stage. So you're at that awareness stage, and now the learning stage is trying to figure out, how can I do it differently now? A lot of times people try to use the same strategies that they did before their injuries or before whatever happened to them, because that was their norm. That was what worked for them. And so you just keep sort of going back to what was the tried and true for you. After your injury, those tried and true strategies or techniques may no longer work. And that's where that awareness comes in. It's like, this isn't working for me now. I need to get into that learning stage, and I need to find a new way of approaching it, or a new way of doing it. Ilona says, can someone hack the password app? Probably the answer to that is yes. I'm sure someone can hack almost anything, but it's much more secure than putting it in a notebook or putting it in your purse or your wallet or something like that. At Coastline, I've had students who had their passwords in their binder because they wanted it to be quick and easy to find, and they'd leave their binder out on the patio area. And so at that point in time, it's open to anyone who might pick up that binder. So it's important that you have a technique or a strategy. Leanne says, wow, that is ever so true. I've been teaching myself using videos to learn tonality and body language, have done more than 1,000 hours over, let's see, can't see here,
The
over
past
the past 6 months. And I didn't know that I was tone deaf and could not read body language. That's that. You didn't know what you didn't know. All of a sudden you have awareness. And now the concept is, now that I have that awareness, what can I do? How can I do things or approach things differently in order to be more successful? Practice, practice, practice. Okay, the last stage is mastery. And mastery is what they call the conscious competence. You know what you know, and you're good at it. You know how to do something automatically without really having to think too much about it. You don't even notice that you're using strategies, and the skill doesn't take as much processing, energy, or time. So in the mastery stage, what you're doing is, it has become so almost second nature to you. So driving is a good example. That's one of our examples here, but when I'm driving, I'm not really thinking about driving. It just sort of is an automatic process. After a brain injury, sometimes that automatic process isn't quite as automatic anymore. But with practice, oftentimes you can master. Now, one thing I do want to say about mastery is, there are some things we may just not be able to master. I am never going to be able to master chemistry. It is just so far beyond me and what I can learn. I've tried, I've had classes. It just is something that I don't feel like I'm ever going to master. And to the point where I sort of don't really want to put my time and my energy into that. So, part of what you want to do in the stages of learning also is make sure that you're putting your time and your energy into something that really matters to you, that, you're going to use. I'm not going to use chemistry in my world. And so I don't really need to try to master that. After the brain injury, or if you have some kind of cognitive challenges, so much energy goes into learning, and it takes longer often for you to learn. So think about what it is that really matters to you. Think about what you really want to learn, or perhaps you really need to learn, and try and focus on that first. And then, if you have extra time and energy and you've mastered those things, then you can learn whatever you want. I can try to learn chemistry, but there's so many things that I would rather try to learn than that. I hope that that makes sense as we go through this. So here's our final scenarios for mastery. You know how long it takes you to perform various tasks. You plan ahead. You establish a realistic and consistent schedule for time management. So you went from not knowing that you were not very good at time to planning it out, establishing realistic goals for yourself, setting a schedule, all of that. For the driving example, you adapted your driving based on a driver's evaluation. You practice driving regularly. You get to the point where you don't have to manually go through a checklist before you drive safely. You consistently review your bills and pay them on time. And finally, you automatically organize by putting things where they belong and using color coding, which is Christy's all-time favorite, in many areas of your life. So, one final thought about mastery is we will each master things at a different level. So, I am pretty good with computers. Okay. I'm not as good as other people with computers, but I'm better than some people. I've mastered computers to a certain extent. And again, if you go back to kind of for the purpose that I have for using computers and understanding computers, I have mastered it at the level that I'm happy with. I may change that. I may want to learn more at some point in time, and that's fine. But I have mastered what I need at this point. Christy is good at computers, but she doesn't. You are, Christy. Come on. Christy is pretty good. We'll go with pretty good at computers, but I've had more experience and more time and more practice. And it's something that I enjoy a lot more than Christy does. And so I've actually mastered it at a different level than Christy has. Uh,
I wanted,
she's still, she's still in that learning stage,
yeah,
but yet she's mastered. If you want to know anything about Notability, the app Notability, Christy has mastered that. So I guess my point is we master different things. And that's what's really cool about this is we don't have to master everything. If I have a question or if someone reaches out to me with a question about Notability, Christy is my go-to person because she is absolutely brilliant at using it. And so I hope that that helps kind of give you an idea that we're not all going to master everything at the same level. Go for it, Christy.
I wanted to say a couple things. When you're in that practice area, and there might be, such as we'll go back to the app idea, that if there are going to be certain times and certain places that you do master in one specific situation where it's not a mastery in another. And when it's not a mastery in another and you're having struggles and then you're still having to practice, don't beat yourself up. And start questioning, why is it okay and easier over here in this situation and then so complex and hard in another area. um, Definitely that has to do with computers. That's why I was so surprised when you said that. um, anyway, I had another thought, but it went away.
Jan, Okay, so I think let's move on to our question. Oh, we'll do our summary first, and then we'll move on to questions, and I'll make a point of referencing some of what's in the chat there. So this is again just a summary. You start at that stage of not knowing what you don't know, which is also known as the ignorant stage. You then become aware of your skill. You become aware of a particular skill, but you may not be proficient at it. That's awareness. Learning is when you're able to begin the process of learning the skill, but it takes a heck of a lot of time and energy and focus and all of that. And we all learn at different paces, and we all learn in different ways. One of the things that we'll talk about at some point in Best, I think we might have it as a webinar, is to talk about learning styles. And learning styles is such an important component. And I don't have any evidence to support this. I haven't seen any research, but I really believe that after a brain injury or after someone has some kind of cognitive challenge that comes upon them, that your learning style changes at least temporarily. And so, knowing how you learn after your injury is a really important thing. Again, it goes back to if you don't know that you're not able to learn in the same way, then you're just going to be struggling constantly. And then the last level is mastery. You know how to do something automatically, and you really don't have to think too hard about it or too much about it. All right. So let's go back to our questions here for just a second. I'm trying to look at them. Let's see. There's some stuff about passwords, so I can see that. I see Lisa's question about sequencing, so we'll come back to that in just a second. I saw something here from Jan that said excellence is excellent at using something doesn't necessarily mean that you understand the whys. That's very true. And for some people, and this goes back to learning styles, believe it or not, for some people, understanding the why is a really important component of learning. For other people, just being able to do it is the level that they learn at. So it's an interesting comment, and that can sometimes be frustrating with people who learn in different ways because you I may learn in one way, Christy learns in a different way, and they don't always sync or work together. And so we have to try and figure out, how do we do this? And one of the ways that Christy does it is she draws pictures, which is very helpful for her. And that actually helps me then better understand as well. I'm not able to draw the pictures. So this is a really important thing of working together with people who may have different approaches than you do, because I think it makes things stronger. And I think there's more success in that. Annie says she started with preschool books, Lisa, for sequencing stuff, got up to first grade, which somehow helped me manage more simple numbers and math. Yeah, I think it's one of the things, and there may be some other professionals on today. If there are, please feel free to chime in the chat. I think part of it is really starting working with memory can be helpful, attention and memory, using some internal strategies, and really starting off simple. I think.
I love the idea. I was a preschool teacher
Mm,
and then eventually a teacher for all grades. But one of the things that I like about that comment, Annie, was to start at the very, very basic part of numbers and not just with numbers, it's sequencing. There's so
mhm,
many things that if you probably went and Googled online videos about sequencing, there could be just a whole bunch of YouTube, how do I learn how to sequence things? Um, there are also a lot of hands-on things that you can do. Um, I was I I was looking at the chat and somebody was saying something about when they were cooking that they would miss a step. And one
mhm,
of the things that I would suggest, and it kind of ties in with the sequencing comment, that with cooking, you might show physically, I if I have to sequence as far as like if I'm reading something that you would read in a recipe, putting that recipe over into some kind of digital document where you could check it off, or
Mhm.
if you could, um, if you don't want to use a digital thing, you could probably get the have the recipe printed off, put it into um, a plastic covered thing, and be able to use one of those exacto pens where you could check off what you've done. Um, I need to physically see or move the thing that I have finished. For instance, if you had to put a cup of flour into something, put the flour off to the side so you've done it. And
Mhm.
so that way, physically, it's not out of sight, out of mind. It's good. It's gone. Um, there was some other comments, but I just wanted to comment on those two things.
That's a great example, Christy. When we talk about learning, and I mentioned self-regulation and sort of having to try things and see what works. Before your brain injury, if you were cooking, you might have well, there's different possibilities. So let's just say before your brain injury, you'd use something, baking soda, baking powder, flour, whatever it might be, and then you'd put it away because you didn't like a mess. Okay. After the brain injury, or when you're struggling with memory and those kinds of things, attention, putting it away, you may forget that you put it in there. And so an adaptation, a way of learning and trying something new is exactly what Christy said. Put it to the left of the bowl that you're using or whatever it might be. And now you can actually see what you've put into the mixture versus what hasn't gone into the mixture. These are just some basic examples of techniques and strategies that you might have to try. That might work for one person, but it won't work for everyone because now you're distracted by all the things that are on the counter. So a lot of what you have to do is trial and error. And that's what learning's all about. You try something, you kind of evaluate it, you see how it's going. And if it doesn't work, then you modify that slightly or maybe completely, depending on the situation. And again, that's going to be a big part of our self regulation webinar that we're going to have coming up here.
I wanted to add to that the mastering and practicing and like the self-regulation, all of those things will incorporate having strategies and building up strategies. The awareness, having the awareness that things um, that you need to learn something when it comes time to setting up learning and practicing, incorporating strategies to go forward. That is why a lot of times we keep hitting the walls, because the strategies that we're using aren't the ones that are really going to help us.
Mm.
And so I just wanted to throw that in. I like what Tom says here.
Well,
Um, isn't one form of mastery knowing when and where and what knowing where and when to ask for help, especially is important if someone has been helping or doing something for you, and they can no longer do that. That was a great comment.
yeah, I was gonna mention that as well. I think that, yeah, part of mastery is knowing, that help is going to be useful or that you need it or when you need to ask for help. All of that, I think, is part of that stage. Jane says that I find mastery post injury is relative. After practice, 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 a task becomes easier and less symptom provoking. But if I do not completely focus, I lose where I am, for instance, in cooking, or how much of something I have already added without any way to retrace the steps to find what's missing. So here's an interesting thing, Jane, in terms of that. I think mastery, remember I said mastery takes a long time, and some of us never get to true mastery. Some of us may be sort of in that learning stage forever. And that sounds kind of weird, but if you look at it in this place, mastery in this example would be you have strategies in place. You're using an app or you're using some kind of paper pencil thing that is going to help you track where you are. As Christy said, you can check it off. So you may still need to use techniques and strategies, but you've mastered it because you're applying those techniques and strategies. You're compensating for the challenges or for the struggles that you have. One of the things that happens, and we'll talk about this as we move forward, but one of the things that happens is Christy calls them life quakes. Like she'll be doing really great. We talk about a lot about this when we talk about the best suite. She'll be really doing great. She'll stop using the best suite or certain aspects of it for a period of time. Then a life quake happens, some kind of change, right? Christy, you can tell this better than I, but some kind of change happens or throws you, and all of a sudden you have to go back to that reliable place in order to begin to build up. So you may achieve mastery, and then something happens, and then that knocks you back down to that learning stage, perhaps. And then you've got to build back up again. Christy, thoughts on that?
Ditto.
Ditto. Mastery of living with the invisible consequences of brain injury is never give up. That works for me because I'm very determined. Yeah, absolutely. Keep finding, keep looking for techniques and strategies. Is mastery the end of the journey and learning is the long journey? The picture in my mind is a race. You don't know what you don't know you want to run a race. You decide you want to race, and learning, learning is the prep and running the race. Awareness is the finish line. I think mastery, is often the goal that people have for certain kinds of things. But again, everyone's going to have a different level of mastery for things. If I wanted to spend 10 years, I might be able to become a master carpenter, but that's not the level of mastery that I want to achieve when it comes to woodworking, let's say. If you think about sports, your favorite sports person, I don't know, whoever it might be, very, very talented, but everyone else on the team has talents as well. So everyone has masters things at a different level. And it takes a lot of practice. Even once you master something, you can be a great basketball player. You still have to practice shooting hoops, or else that skill is going to potentially begin to diminish over time if you don't keep practicing. So those are all things that you kind of have to think about. So it learning and mastery is a lifelong process, I think. Um, and it can be fun. I mean, I find it fun. But again, think about what it is that matters most to you and really put your energy and your strength and your time into those kinds of things, because I think that will encourage you, that will make you feel better, and that will encourage you to try other things and to learn and master potentially other things. So keep that in mind. Jan loves your life quake comment or your life quake phrase.
It's not
Christy.
mine, Jan. I borrowed it from another survivor. I
All
love
right.
it too.
We're going to end with just a little bit about the best suite, and we tried to tie this into our topic for today. So, as some of you may know, we have an app called the Best Suite. It's 5 apps in one. It works on time management and energy and symptom kind of management, goal setting, task management, strategies, and checklists and things like that, memory. So what we wanted to do was sort of show you how the best suite might relate to what we're talking about today. So in terms of Pace My Day, we talked a lot, or one of our scenarios was time management. Pace My Day can actually help you with some of the planning and the pacing of the activities. We said that learning and mastery is when you know how long it takes you to do something and you have everything laid out. Pace My Day can actually help you with that. Reach My Goals, an example that we had, a scenario was driving. Reach My Goals could actually help you come up with all the different steps that you need to take to get your driver's evaluation, and then all the different things that you need to work on as a result of receiving the feedback from the driver evaluation. Strategize My Life. would fit within the time management scenario that we gave you, the driving scenario, or even paying bills. You could create a strategy bank in Strategize My Life of all sorts of different strategies and then have them available to you when you need them. Complete My To-Dos is one example would be the bills, where you can put due dates and have reminders set in order to pay your bills on time. And then finally, Queue My List. An example or scenarios would be driving in the organization. Queue My List is all about creating checklists for yourself. So putting a recipe or something like that, checking off the items that you need to make sure that you have, shopping lists, those kinds of things can be done in Queue My List. One other thing that I wanted to mention, and this is sort of a final example, if you will, of the learning process. So you might think, I don't really need the best suite, or I don't need an app in general. I'm good. I can just use paper and pencil. So that may be true. For some people, that might be a not knowing what you don't know. You may not recognize that you put stuff on paper, but you never have it when you need it. It's not there with you when you're at the store or something like that. And then you recognize, you know what? I'm recognizing that I never have my shopping list when I go shopping. And so I really need to do something about that. That's the awareness stage. The learning stage might be where you say, oh, okay, I've got this best suite. I can use it for all these different things. And it takes time to learn how to use the best suite. You have to be committed to learning how to do certain kinds of things. Unfortunately, and this is not just with the best suite, but oftentimes when we want to learn something, we want to learn it fast and we want it to just be there and be supernatural for us. We want to master it immediately. And the reality is it takes time to learn things. It takes time not only to learn the steps to do things, but as Jan mentioned earlier, it takes time to understand the why. You might want to do things. So that's the learning phase. And then you get to the mastery phase, which is where you pull out your app and you automatically open it up. It's a compensatory tool. It's not that you're remembering your shopping list necessarily, but you have that information. You know where to find it. You regularly put it into the app so that you have it. And that is an example of mastery to a certain extent. So here's just an example, a screenshot of Strategize My Life. We've actually put the 4 stages of learning in Strategize My Life as an example, just to give you some insight as to how you might be able to use it or apps to help as you're going through your particular journey. We have 3 more webinars left in this webinar series. Pace Yourself to Help Manage Neurofatigue is going to be the next webinar on February 12th. Self-regulation and 2 questions to ask yourself before so that you can take back control is going to be February 26th. I mentioned self-regulation today, so hopefully that will be of interest to you. And then our final webinar is going to be executive function and why it really matters after brain injury, or if you're dealing with some kind of cognitive challenges. And so that is going to be our upcoming webinar series. I will mention we are going to be offering a workshop in March. And if you are part of our mailing list, you will receive an email next week, a newsletter that has some information about that. It's going to be a 3-week, what we call workshop. It'll be a couple of hours a week that we will get together and really do a deeper dive into the topic of self-regulation, and the 2 questions is actually our first workshop. We also have a Facebook group. We would love for you to join it. We're going to be taking snippets from our webinars, putting them in the Facebook group, as well as some other things that Lisa has planned. If you are on social media, we would love for you to like our posts and comment, etc. That would be extremely helpful for us, especially share information that we may provide in webinars or on social media, etc. I just activated a poll. If you would mind taking just a moment to go to the poll, it should have popped up, and tell us, did you find today's webinar informative? It really matters to us that what we're doing is helpful to you. And so if there is some kind of something that we may be able to do different or a different approach, we're certainly willing and interested in exploring that. So please, thank you very much. I also wanted to mention that we do have an after hours that we do usually for about an hour after the webinar. It's a Zoom session that we all join, those of us that want to join and continue our discussion. We would love to have you join us in that. I just added the Zoom link for that. There's a link and a join code and a passcode, a meeting ID and a passcode. So
Before we close, I just wanted
yeah,
to
go
go
ahead.
back on something real quick. I know we're approaching the hour. Annie put in here that after learning the best suite, it actually gave me insights into
Mm.
those challenges I was ignorant to, uh, and having a life coach in many ways. So
Oh,
I I appreciate that comment, and it. I agree, Annie. Having using the best suite is was very helpful to me. Gave a lot of insight, so thank you. And I look forward to seeing you guys on the after hours Zoom.
yeah, that would be great. Let's see. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, perfect. So I don't think we have any other questions. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you in a couple weeks for our next webinar. It's all about neurofatigue and learning to pace yourself. And we will be talking in that webinar, we'll be talking about neurofatigue and pacing yourself. And we're going to be bringing up Pace My Day because that is one way that you can use to help pace yourself. So there'll be several different things involved in it. Okay, the passcode is wrong. Note the passcode is actually 30621. I don't know if that's true. I just copied this straight out of Zoom. So we may want to write down both, and then if one doesn't work, but I just grabbed this straight from Zoom. So
Oh, you
um,
know what? I could have put in the wrong one. Sorry, don't look at mine.
oh, okay. So the one that I added has the actual link and the ID and the passcode. So let's go with that just to make sure. Oh, it's in Christie's post. Okay. So very good. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful couple weeks, and we will see you soon. Please join us in the after hours. We'll be there in just a moment. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.